Hello and welcome back to Perspectives. On today's show, we have our usual roundup of stories affecting the Sikh community around the world, and we'll also take an in-depth analysis of the latest propaganda hit piece from a growing Hindutva outlet that doesn't just smear the Khalistan campaign, but also manages to label the whole Sikh religion as a dangerous cult of murderers and criminals. Well, I'm sure our audience members may have a bit to say about that one. Anyway, all that and more on today's show. But joining me, as always, is our very own correspondent in Canada, James Cousineau. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Angus. And don't worry, it's just a matter of time before the government of India tries to label us as, persona non grata. They'll be saying, those guys aren't allowed in our country. Well, they probably already have, and we just ignored them. But in any event, welcome back to another episode of Perspectives, ladies and gentlemen. It's always great to have you here. Don't forget to stick around to the end of the show to see what comments made the grade, and we'll see if Critics Corner makes an appearance or not. Other than that, we also really encourage you to like, follow, and subscribe, and share the stories with your friends with the episodes here, and also, of course, Surrender's program and other programs that are available on Satellite TV and the Satellite Network. Your help to push up the subscribers is greatly appreciated, and we're trying to get up as high as we can to see what we can do between now and the end of the year, because it is coming very quickly. Back to you, Angus.
Indeed. And in the meantime, James and I will be bringing you our perspectives on the daily news affecting the Sikh community across the world. And at the end of the show, as always, we'll take a look at Leslie. Great comments, so thank you for those. Right, James, a lot to get through today. As always, what are you going to start us off with this morning?
We are starting off with a story that comes from the Times of India. And I kind of got a chuckle out of this because it lists the top 10, the international list of the most unsafe countries and the biggest crime rates. And I thought, are they really just pushing the narrative of the top 10, or are they celebrating that they weren't in the top 10? I'm not sure which way they're looking for the reason behind publishing it. But I just thought I would just scoot through the list quickly here. And it appears, of course, we know that poverty plays a major role in the instances of crime when you have high levels of poverty and low levels of opportunity for youth and younger adults. You see a rise in criminality, whether it's gang involvement or individual crimes that are, everything from property thefts to violent crime. Of course, the sad part is that a lot of the youth get enticed by the gangs that are operating in different countries, and it's no different in the Western world either, where they are enticed into the gangs. They see the drug dealers and the gang members that are flashing all the gold. They're, hanging out with the beautiful women, or the girl gangs are hanging out with the guys that are all buff, and, unfortunately they don't realize that those guys got buff because they've been spending time in prison. But regardless, it is a never-ending cycle at that point when they don't see opportunity ahead. And that's where the countries that offer free tuition and other programs that are supported by the state, and when they also inject a lot of money into law enforcement and make sure that they're not corrupt. That is a big one right there. So that's when you see the crime rates at the other end of the pendulum, such as Sweden and Denmark and countries to that nature. So, of course, Haiti being one that we know is very unstable. And they say that gangs control 60 to 100% of Port-au-Prince, and that is a lot to do with the political unrest. So again, they are recording 2,490 kidnappings and 4,789 homicides. I mean, Haiti really is not that large of a country, and to see those type of numbers is just horrific. And when you look at other issues, of course, they know that there's transit points of cocaine and marijuana that transit through the nation or start in the nation and get transported out. And because of the porous borders, the border controls are very weak, and there's very high levels of corruption within government and law enforcement there. Next on the list was Papua New Guinea. Again, 80.7, and this is out of 100. You want to be lower. You don't want to be in the 80s and 90s, that's for sure. The higher the number, this is basically how many crimes per 100,000 divided by, it's a formula that they come up with, but basically it's out of 100, the total scoring, and they've got 80.7, which ranks them at number 2 in terms of criminality. Again, when you look at that, Both petty crime and violent crime is a major concern there, and gang activity. Again, when they look at this, they are finding that the low employment rate for youth and young adults has a major direct correlation to the criminality rates. Venezuela, which or at least I wasn't really surprised at. I know that they are very entrenched with the different levels of cocaine that flows either out of or through there into Europe and other nations. And although we hear a lot about the fentanyl coming out of Venezuela by the U.S. government, and that's why they're blowing up these boats, realistically, a lot of those boats, if they are carrying drugs, it's not fentanyl, it would be cocaine or other derivatives thereof, and they would be heading to other markets. They wouldn't actually be going to the States given the distance and the boats that they're using. So again, just to bring that back into the reality, the rule of law has essentially been thrown out the window in a lot of cases. The corrupt government there for decades has had a major role in the instability in Venezuela. Now, Afghanistan, well, I don't think that really surprises us given the opium trade, and about 85% of the illegal opium that's going around the world is originating from Afghanistan. And therefore, you have a lot of the cartels and the gangs that are controlling that. Again, not surprising to see them on the list. South Africa, of course, high rates of assault, homicide, sexual violence. South Africa is ranked 5th in the world. These numbers are the result of a pervasive inequality, unemployment, and the normalization of violence, according to this article and according to the report. When you look at Honduras, of course, 71.9, still extremely high. And we know that with the drug trade and the gang roots, of course, that is a big part of it. Then we have Trinidad and Tobago at 71. And then we scroll down, and I'm just going to give you the last couple here without going into too much detail. Of course, Syria with the civil war and other instabilities in that nation really make it a desperation move by a lot of the gangs and a lot of the individual crimes. And then Jamaica, that was once a safe haven for vacationers and had that real Caribbean and exotic reputation for vacationing or for travel. Again, that has gone to the wayside over the last several years or the last decade or so, and that is again the increased level of gang activity. Violent crime is extremely high, including sexual violence. So again, that is. And then topping off the list at number 10 is Peru at 66.7. Again, drug trafficking groups are operating heavily out of Peru, so it's not really a shock to see them there. And when you look at this, of course, this is the crime severity index that you're looking at from a global context. And when you take into the gangs and everything else, however, if you were to break it down by category of crime, I'm sure that the numbers may look a little different for this list, at least in the top 10. And that I just thought was interesting to bring up to our viewers to see where the rates are, and then to be able to compare that and understand that if we don't start doing something about the employment rates for youth in the Western nations, we're going to be following the same patterns. It's happened in the past. When we look at the crack pandemic or epidemic in the 80s and 90s, we saw that shoot up. There was a lack of employment opportunity for young adults and youth. They saw that the gangsters had all the gold, the nice cars, and everything else that they wanted, but they didn't see the longevity of it and the fact that most gangsters, especially youth gangs, they end up either incarcerated for life or they end up dead. There's not really a third option in most cases, and that's something that they don't see until it's too late and they're so entrenched in that gang lifestyle. So if we don't start paying paying more attention and putting more resources into dealing with the crime, then we're going to see the same pattern. And that should be a concern, especially when you look here in Canada at how many youth are involved and young adults are involved in the extortion rings, in the violence that's plaguing and targeting the South Asian community. And that has a lot to do with it. If we don't give them opportunities, or at least allow them the visualization of opportunities to let them know that there is a path outside of that criminality. We also, just in closing that off, of course, we want to encourage more acceptability, not further separation. When it comes to immigrants coming into, whether it's Canada, the UK, the US, we want to make them feel welcome. We want them to feel a part of it. We want the youth to find their new wings, so to speak, to fly. And that means that really changing attitudes. Right now, we're seeing a lot of racially motivated hate. We're seeing a lot of racially motivated division. When that happens, then youth, again, are isolated. They have that human need, like the rest of us, to feel a sense of belonging, to feel a sense of pride in themselves, but also in their social circles. If they are not getting acceptance and involvement there, then they are going to be targeted by the gangs for recruitment, who are going to give them that false sense of security, that false sense of acceptance, and so forth. So again, very important. As we speak to that, we can look at another case in Canada that has dragged on 14 years, ladies and gentlemen. A very rare instance in Canada, because we do have time limitations on most trials and most criminal cases to move through the system. This one was an exception, and there are exceptions to the rule, but overall there are limitations on the prosecution timelines. Now, this one here actually involves Dean Whipchar, who was a member of a gang in Vancouver, and he was responsible for the attempted murder of a Hells Angel, as well in the murder of someone in Toronto, a rival gang member, and then back in Vancouver and Kelowna in British Columbia, where he killed Jamie Bacon and the injuring of one of the Hells Angels leaders. And there was this circle, and that's why I wanted to bring this photo up here that they had been running in the Vancouver Sun, because it shows the different gangs here. You've got a representative from the Hells Angels. You have Rabia Cole. And then you also have the Wolfpack gangster, James Ryak. Now, these other gangs that are really intertwined because they work together when they have the agreements between themselves to block out the other gangs. So they team up together to secure the trafficking of narcotics in certain regions. To be involved in extortion, to be involved in kidnappings, to be involved in murder for hires, and so much more. So again, they're very intertwined, but there is also a point where if they feel slighted, or they feel that the one gang is trying to take too much territory out of an previously agreed upon range, then again, it turns violent. That is one of the things that we've seen over and over in Surrey and in Brampton, in Mississauga, in Toronto, in Calgary, Edmonton, Winnipeg. I can just go on across the nation on the cities that are having this problem. And it includes these gangs as well as the Brothers Keepers and the United Nations and the Red Scorpions and so forth. Now, this individual has surprised everyone by finally pleading guilty, not to the two murders that he was being charged with and the attempted murder, but instead he pled out to 2 counts of conspiracy to commit murder. And again, the Crown looked at it as an opportunity to end this case, to finally have some closure for the families who were in the courtroom for the announcement and the pleading. They didn't expect the pleading to happen, but it did happen, and the agreement was that he will spend another 20 years in prison. That is a result of these two assassination or these two murder these two murder indictments, or the conspiracy, sorry. Now, as that goes on, here's the individual here, and he is already serving a life sentence in Ontario for a murder that had happened. He would have been actually brought in on a third one, murder of Mr. Doc, but again, because he was arrested and in custody at the time, it kind of overlapped with that hit that he had agreed to take on, and that prevented that hit, but somebody else got to that individual, and still to this day is unsolved. So again, just looking at the criminality, how the cycles of the gangs work, and going back to our first story and how that ties in with the lack of opportunity for youth and lack of programming, lack of acceptance, then they follow into these gangs. And these gangs have recruiters. They're like the military. They know how to target the youth. They know who they're targeting. They have profiles of individuals that are going to be easier to bring into the gang and to really entice them, whether that's through drugs, whether that's through cash, whether it's just because of the need for acceptance in a social circle. So again, they prey on these youth, and that is something that is a major concern. Once again, as I said, we've seen it in inner city areas of Los Angeles, Detroit, New York, Toronto, Vancouver. We've seen it over and over in these cycles. And it's not coming to a head very soon if we don't start targeting the resources where they need to be. Now, as we shift gears talking about trouble, the Indian Airlines are, of course, scrambling to catch up with the demand. Oh, sorry, was that, were you saying something, Angus?
I was just coughing. Sorry, sorry, James.
Oh, okay, I wasn't sure there. I just heard the blip in the background. Sorry, folks. But in any event, the Indian Airlines, in particular Indigo, has been really slow in adapting to the new changes to combat pilot fatigue. A big concern for anybody flying is that you don't want a pilot that is dozy or falling asleep, just plain and simple. India does not adhere to the same international strict guidelines that other countries do for domestic flights throughout the country. This said, the India government has made steps towards giving more rest and requirements to the pilots when it comes to the the increase from 36 hours to a 48-hour time off at least once a week. So they get 2 full days. If they book days off, then that cannot count towards those 2 days that are guaranteed per week. And they also need to adhere to other restrictions as well. So, for example, a pilot cannot have more than 2 flights that go for more than 10 hours. Or sorry, they can't have any flights that go after 10 hours if that starts in the afternoon and ends in the evening. And twice a week is the maximum that a pilot is allowed to land between midnight and 4 a.m. So again, trying to cut down the number of incidents of fatigued pilots. As the airline, though, knowing that this deadline was coming up for almost 2 years now, they had a hiring freeze on. They weren't looking at bringing in more pilots. They were cutting back. They were doing basically nothing to address this change that was really rapidly coming up when you consider how long it takes for a cycle to find pilots, recruit them, hire them, make sure they're up to your standards, which I'm guessing is pretty easy at this point. Now, India, of course, is coming under fire because Indigo is one of their largest carriers. But in addition to that, they have a monopoly on many of the small airports in small cities as commuter or regional flights. And this has caused thousands of flights, over 4,000 flights since the 2nd of December have been canceled. This has been leaving people abandoned at airports. There are people that were going on vacations, going for weddings, going for medical treatments, all of these things. And all of a sudden there's, all of these flights have just been wiped off, and there's not really huge alternatives for people to get replacements on those. Now, India has a very tight grip on the airline industry when it comes to the choices. Air India and combined with this flight or this airline here, they almost have a monopoly on, a majority of all flights in and out of the country and within the country. So again, this is causing chaos. Now, the government is charging back and coming at them because they operate 2,200 flights a day, and they are saying that this is not acceptable. They gave them ample warning. They were consulted prior to the changes coming in to say, how long do you need? What are we going to do about this? And what is the next step? And the airline failed at that. Now, this, of course, interrupted major cities as well, like New Delhi, Mumbai, and Hyderabad, and others. And again, just left people stranded. And now they have to look, are they going to get their refunds? Are they going to get, new flights within a couple of days, or are they going to have to cancel altogether? It is causing chaos, and it's not fair to the travelers, especially when you consider how many travelers don't have the liquidity to just go and purchase more tickets. A lot of people save for attending a granddaughter's wedding or a grandson's wedding. They have saved for this because it's something that is a life moment. And for them not to be able to attend because they can't afford the alternatives, then that is an issue. The government of India has also come down hard on them in the past for their price fixing and what has been described by the India government as cartel-like behavior within the airline industry. The collusion between airlines to price fix, the shortage of flights driving prices up so that the airline doesn't take as much of a loss as the passengers do. So again, it is a big problem, and if they don't get it straightened out, then it's going to cause thousands and thousands of more flights to be canceled. Yesterday alone, there were over 400 flights by mid-afternoon that were canceled, and we didn't have the total number going through the entire day yesterday, but I'm sure it was a lot higher. And that is a major problem. One of the things I found interesting is that the co-founder and one of the leads of that airline was actually educated in Canada. And I don't know, maybe he's taken a page out of the old Canadian Airlines book that went defunct, but it's definitely not a path that you want to see traveled. We've seen airline chaos here in Canada, and it is ugly. It is, not just an inconvenience, but for some, it is a life-threatening situation when they can't get to bigger cities for the medical treatment they need. Just a scary thought, Angus, when you look at the world of travel and having tired and worn out staff, manning the throttles of the plane.
Yes, indeed, James. And, certainly I wouldn't want to be in an aircraft flown by a lady or gentleman who's been awake for longer than they should have been. So, yes. I just want to jump back to the story about the top 10 crime-ridden countries of the world. India doesn't feature, and I'd be horrified if it did, frankly. This, again, as supposedly the world's largest democracy, it would be shameful if it did. But unfortunately, these statistics that are collated here, they are sort of very wrapped up in a very sort of summary manner. And of course, primarily the nations that are on that list tend to be smaller nations where, again, it's very when the rule of law sort of breaks down, the per capita crime rate does rise very quickly, and it's very easy to drop into these. Of course, India is a very different animal. 1.4 billion population. Yeah, of course, it would have to be almost unenterable if it was in that list with the absolute number of crimes in absolute terms. But one of the reasons I think one of the things that you picked up on there, James, is the categories of crime. These nations are well known for high rates of murders and kidnappings, abductions, etc. I mean, Venezuela, Peru, all the sort of the well known suspects, Haiti, etc. But of course, if you look at India at specific crime categories, India sadly does lead the world in many of these categories, and particularly sexual assaults against women, crimes against women. It is these crimes against women, and particularly women of the lower caste. Now, the problem with India is that it tends not to report a lot of its crimes because a lot of the crimes are perpetuated against individuals, and particularly women in the lower caste, the Dalits primarily. And of course, if you're a Dalit woman, you're raped or attacked or sexually assaulted, it's unlikely that you will even report that crime because you know full well that you go to the police station, you're not going to be taken seriously. You're going to be dismissed because, of course, sadly, the caste system is this structural straitjacket that ensures that the vast majority of the population who sit in those lower castes do not get a fair hearing, legally speaking. In other words, those in the upper caste, the upper echelons of that caste pyramid, can undertake crimes against those in lower castes and know full well that under the Indian system it's likely they'll get away with it. Primarily because, well, firstly because it's unlikely that crime that you undertake will even get reported, and therefore the statistics in themselves lie. And secondly, even if it is reported, it's likely that your crime will be dismissed by other fellow upper caste members of the law enforcement agencies and state apparatus. And this is the problem. So unfortunately, India, India is not a Haiti, it is not a Venezuela, let's be clear about that. But ultimately, there's something like, I forget the actual specific statistics, but we do cover it regularly. There's something like one rape occurs every 9 minutes in India. And again, if you scale it up in terms of the population, in absolute terms, that is a horrifying statistic, the number of women who are raped and sexually assaulted. It's not just simple rapes, it's gang rapes. It is sexual violence of the most extreme nature that occurs in India. And again, it only really hit the headlines, certainly the global headlines, was it last year when a doctor was actually raped and murdered in her own hospital. And again, we even said at the time, look, the only reason that this has actually hit the headlines is because it just happens to be somebody from, presumably, one of the middle or upper caste sections of society. It happened to a doctor. How dare it happen to a doctor? Well, unfortunately, crimes like that happen on a daily basis and a regular basis against Dalit women. And again, those don't get reported, those don't hit the mainstream headlines. So again, even though the Times of India might be sort of quite relieved and breathing a sigh of relief to see that India is not in the top 10, I'll be horrified if it was, as I said. But ultimately, it needs to do a little bit of introspection and look at the state of crime in India. Because sadly, the drivers of crime tend to be poverty, unemployment. Of course, they go hand in hand. Drugs, of course. We look at the Punjab, which is, it appears the Punjab is being infiltrated by the drug cartels of India because it's, as I said, and we often report, it's likely that this is a state-sponsored agenda to deliberately undermine the Punjab, and it knows it can do that by decreasing employment, in other words, dissolving its industrial base, as it has been doing, increasing the poverty, which obviously is a byproduct of that, and ensuring that there's a free flow of drugs into the Punjab. So again, it's very likely that there is this clear agenda, but India knows full well what it does. Of course, it increases crime, and you see right across right-wing social media how the right-wing social media Hindutva bots are always happy to highlight pictures, videos, whatever of crime in the Punjab. Yeah, but who's actually behind it? But sadly, that is a real indictment of modern-day India. And as I say, modern-day India likes to sort of bestride the global stage, saying, look at us, the world's largest democracy. Well, unfortunately, the rule of law is failing in India, as we often report. It's failing at every level, but particularly against our most vulnerable in society, and that, of course, includes women and the lower caste, James. I think that in itself, it doesn't come out in these statistics, but it is well known.
Yeah. Absolutely, Angus, and you're just hit the nail on the head there in that the sexual assault rates are just astronomical in India. And whether that's the big cities or the small farming communities, this has been an issue for decades that has still gone unchanged. And I actually have an audio queued up that we'll play tomorrow night. I was going to play it tonight if I had time, but we're running a bit tight on time. So we'll play it tomorrow night. And this is an interview from a human rights and a women's rights activist that's actually, that this interview came out from the United Nations in February of 2017. And I thought that it was very important because it really shows the context that nothing has changed in India since 2017, when they had the very almost mirrored image of what we're seeing today in terms of the levels of sexual assaults, the blame and shame of the victims. And, so we'll listen to that tomorrow night, Angus.
Great, look forward to that one, James. So in the meantime, let me move on to my story. We talk about a YouTube channel every now and again, a Canadian-based YouTube channel. And James, of course, you're very familiar with this channel. It's Media Bazirgan. Yes. Now, they uploaded yesterday, I have to say, a pretty horrific video, a video that really targeted, had a very specific agenda to target the Sikh community. And I'll play bits of it and I'll go through it just to give you a flavour of it. But again, this sort of video, it skirts legality, and certainly here in the UK, a video like this would actually literally skirt legality, because it doesn't quite incite violence, but some of the claims it makes are, well, apart from defamation and slander, etc., they are deeply, deeply wrong and deeply troubling. Anyway, let me start. I'm going to play snippets of this and talk about snippets of this as we go through, and just give we don't unfortunately have the whole video is 40 minutes long, so unfortunately we don't have time to obviously pick apart the whole video. So I've got a few select parts which I do want to pick up and just give you a flavour of what this video contains. And thank you to our correspondent who brought this to our attention. Let's just kick off now. Here's the introduction to the video to give you a flavour of what's to come.
In this report, you'll hear from a Canadian-born former Sikh who says extremists hijacked his community.
Canada is the stronghold and headquarters of Sikh extremist terrorism.
A former Babar Khalsa figure once sentenced to life in Canada for a US bomb plot.
This is a genocide.
And an American academic with a PhD in political science who explains how the term genocide has evolved into political currency. The views expressed belong to the interviewees. My role is to present them without censorship.
Now, that's an interesting opening statement from that young lad. And I just want you to remember that as we go through this. He claims he's just displaying, these are not his views. Unfortunately, he then goes on to actually prove that he's already drawn his conclusions himself. He's actually framed this whole video. Again, this is real amateur stuff from his part. It's so deeply obvious as reframed propaganda. But he has the temerity at the opening part to say, "I'm just here to present the facts," and then goes on to actually prove the fact that he's already drawn his own conclusions, and this video is then put together to fit his conclusions. Anyway, let's continue.
The narrative of "we were genocided and persecuted by India" is routinely used by pro-Khalistan activists to lobby political figures, including US President Donald Trump, to show leniency toward unqualified Sikh truck drivers who are killing innocent Americans. If these claims go unchallenged, the result is predictable: more scams, drug trafficking, targeted violence, unsafe highways, and fraudulent claims for refuge.
So again, you can see how he's already framed the narrative. He's stated as fact that the Sikh community are just full of frauds, scammers, con artists, the trucking industry is corrupt, etc., etc. So again, even without presenting any evidence to support this fact, he said he's going to prove, or he's already framed the actual narrative that these are stated facts. And the rest of the video then is there just to support his conclusion already. We can continue.
Mr. Kella asked me my personal view, and my answer seemingly angered him, prompting him to question my humanity.
So this is Santok Singh Kella. He's a former member of Babar Khalsa, which is actually a prescribed terrorist organisation in Canada. But Santok Singh Kella, just to give you a bit of background, he was implicated in the Air India bombing. But he was sentenced, but then he was actually released when it turned out actually that there was a problem with his actual original conviction. So in other words, he is actually has been seen as innocent. He is released, and there's an interesting part after this which actually helps to support that. But anyway, so what he did, this young lad approached Santok Singh Kella. and started asking about the genocide. Why do you think it was a genocide? And it was, I have to say, it's a pretty pointless. It goes on for quite a great length, and it's a pretty pointless conversation because clearly this young lad has already made up his mind. Santok is trying to get his point across in a very heated environment. Again, it was a pretty pointless interview. The message to this young, well, I won't call him a journalist, he's a propagandist. But the message to him is, look, if you want to talk about this sensibly, do a proper interview. Don't just try and catch him out or lay traps in this sort of environment and then try and post it up as a reframed narrative. It's not journalism, it's just pure propagandism. Anyway, we continue.
You know, Mr. Moka, is it a genocide?
I don't know, the numbers seem very low.
What number you think is high? 30,000 killing in one day, you think is a low?
No, I think even one is bad, even one killing is bad. But genocide, 30,000 compared to bigger genocides like 1 million, it falls short.
I was.
So that's an interesting one. Again, he calls himself a journalist, and he's done a whole video, 40-minute video about defining genocide, but he actually hasn't looked at the legal definition of what a genocide is. It's nothing to do with the actual numbers. And he's saying, he tries to sort of come across as, look, I'm a reasonable guy. Even one person dying is terrible. Yeah, well, very good. But then you now, when the Sikh comes back and said, so you're saying 30,000 isn't enough? And he implies, no, it should be like 1 million or something. Well, James, as you reported quite recently, and I refer our audience back to the article that James did, where we actually looked at the legal definition of what a genocide is, and it is likely that certainly many events that occurred in Punjab against the Sikh community could easily be classified as genocides. Yet this lad has got it clearly linked. Well, it's all about numbers, isn't it? There weren't enough Sikhs killed, so you can't call it genocide. Is his narrative? So again, sadly, it proves the point that he's not a journalist. Again, he's just a propagandist who actually hasn't even done his basic research on the very topic that this video is supposed to be about. Anyway, and rather interestingly, he actually included this following sequence, which actually made me chuckle. He included this in his video. This actually occurred during his interview.
They burn on the stove, 18 days baby, they killed by the shoot. Very good. Very good.
You're being interviewed. I'm sorry.
No problem. Hello, sir.
How are you?
The best police we have here. Proud of the police. Our police, the best police. Who always our community.
Now, this young lad went to great pains to put across this subliminal message that Santok is a terrorist, that he's a danger to modern society. He is a Khalistani terrorist.
Right.
And yet, in his interview, you see the local police welcoming, and you see that very amicable relationship. Well, clearly, I think that speaks for itself. This is the police welcoming this so-called terrorist. You tried to frame him as a terrorist, and yet here he is actually fist bumping with the local police, who were quite happy to see him. So anyway, so that was that whole section, and again, I think that was a bit of an own goal, really, frankly, that whole section. And it was a bit, again, if it was a serious journalist, that whole section of that report was actually pretty pointless and did not support the argument whatsoever. Anyway, now the bit that really, I think the dangerous part of this interview comes up next. This is an interesting interview with a guy called Bob Ray. Now, Bob Ray is a former Sikh. He was a former Sikh devotee who left the religion for reasons that he will expound. And he is a regular interviewee on this Media Bazurgan channel. He's clearly a Hindutva plant, or if he's not a Hindutva plant, he's got some serious issues. But anyway, let me give you a flavour. These are things he starts to say in this specific interview, which actually is reflected in many previous interviews he has done on the same channel.
Well, the Sikhs at the time in 1984 and the period leading up to June of 1984 were being controlled by this radical terrorist named Sant Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale, and they would come out, assassinate people, rob people, extort people, both Hindus and Sikhs and others within Punjab, and then run back inside of the Golden Temple and take shelter because they were on the belief that the Indian National Party, the Congress, would not be able to eradicate them as long as they were within this holy shrine in Amritsar, Punjab.
So this guy, and there's a whole long section of this guy tries, and he basically rewrites history, and he talks about Bhindranwale being a terrorist, and he goes to great pains to sort of explain how Bhindranwale was a renegade, a criminal, an outlaw, basically running around, causing a crime wave across Punjab, intimidating people, harassing people, stealing, etc., murdering, and basically he's trying to again to frame this narrative that Bhindranwale was some form of terrorist, and therefore the Indian state had absolutely no choice but to launch their attack on the Harmandir Sahib. And again, this does go at great length, and it does continue.
So Bhindranwale was a uneducated religious bigot that was born and raised in Punjab, and he hijacked the Sikh religion and through fear, intimidation, and violence controlled this predominantly peaceful community and radicalized them to become anti-Hindu extremists and terrorists.
Wow. Again, I mean, I don't even need to sort of, editorialize that one either. I think those accusations speak for themselves. They're pretty horrific. But again, you see, the whole framing of his story is that Bhindranwale was a terrorist, that Operation Blue Star was an inevitable reaction by the Indian government. They had no choice but to try and stamp down on this terrorist activity going on in the Punjab. So Operation Blue Star, in his opinion, was clearly justified in itself. Again, he talks about how Bhindranwale hijacked the religion, that he radicalized the Sikh community to become anti-Hindu extremists and terrorists. Again, these claims are completely rewriting history. I mean, he only needs, again, there's no talk about the Anandpur resolution, this whole fight back. Bhindranwale stood for the basic human rights of Sikhs in the Punjab. But there's no mention of that. It's all about, no, he was just some renegade outlaw who was just doing it for criminal fun and jollies. Anyway, it gets worse.
In Sikhism, which I believe is a religion that has gone off the tracks and become a cult, betrayal, deceit, fraud, criminal activity, and murder are some of the main ingredients that this cult is comprised of.
Mr. Ray explains why he believes Khalistani Sikhs had to frame the events of 1984 as genocide to justify their acts of terrorism, which reflected very poorly on their global image.
So again, I mean, this is an attack, again, not just on Khalistan, it's not just on Bhindranwale, but on the whole Sikh community globally, saying that Sikhism, in his words, is a cult. It is a cult of betrayal, deceit, fraud, criminal activity, and murder. And the danger of this, and we remember that other podcast we looked at, the Elevate podcast, where again this right-winger podcast talked. He actually made the statement: all Sikhs are murderers. They want to murder everyone. So again, it's just this complete reframing. Again, this sort of statement, and ironically, this is a side issue. If I made this statement about Islam, for example, in the UK, if I said Islam was a cult of deceit, fraud, criminal activity, and murder, that actually is a criminal offence here in the UK, which again is another different argument. I don't know if it would be in Canada, but if it isn't, it probably will be soon. That's another discussion. But basically, this statement that he's just come out with, apart from the fact it's factually wrong and morally wrong, it is just it has the potential to incite violence and hatred and division. It is a deeply dangerous statement that he's come out with, and he's basically, and his whole narrative again is saying that the Sikh community are using the events of 1984 to justify, in his words, their acts of terrorism. Again, it's, in other words, the whole thing is just, we're just trying to protect our image. Sikhs are trying to protect their image as terrorists, saying, "Oh, we're not terrorists, really. We're just trying to do it as vengeance." So what he's saying is the whole premise of 1984, the whole premise of trying to get it called as a genocide, is to cover up our own crimes. Go figure.
Yeah.
And then in 1986. Sikhs within Canada were arrested after an FBI operation where they were trying to bomb another Air India jetliner that was about to leave John F. Kennedy Airport in New York. And the FBI sabotaged their operations And the Canadian government, which was lawless at the time and still continues to be lawless, arrested some of the Sikh conspirators at the time, only later on to discharge these individuals and give them a clean chit. So I believe that repeated Sikh terrorism and extremism that started from within the Golden Temple in 1984 continues until this day to rampage all over good people and good citizens, especially the citizens of Canada.
So again, I mean, it just doubles down on this in this outrageous sort of statements that, well, first of all, there's a long section about Air India, surprise, surprise, and how supposedly Khalistani terrorists were behind that. But there's also this second, what he claims is a second attempted bombing from JFK, another Air Indian flight, where some Sikhs were arrested for that by the FBI, but then they were given, in his words, a clean chit. Basically, they were freed because they were found not guilty. And yet, he then says the problem was it was the Canadian government who deliberately let them free. And he says, therefore, that like the Sikhs, the Canadian government is lawless. It was then and it is now. So he's actually trying to claim that somehow the Canadian government are complicit in Sikh terrorism, is basically his statement. And as he says, Sikh extremism continues to rampage all over Canada. Good heavens. James, I hope you're keeping your head down with all this Sikh extremism rampaging all over Canada. Anyway, it goes on. And then the next... I'll come back to you, James, because I'm sure you've got a lot to come back on this one. And then his third and final guest. This is a professor of political science, again based in Canada. And he asked this guy all about, and again, it was all about framing and all about propaganda. He's clearly framed his questions to get the answers that he wants. But this is what a professor of political science said about genocide and the claims for genocide.
You're killing thousands of people, approaching 40,000 people, and all these children. Well, whether it's called a genocide or not, it is kind of doesn't matter. So I think the word genocide has come to have this significance where you want to connect your group to that because it gives you a certain status.
And that's true. I don't disagree with what this professor says. This professor has actually come out with a statement of fact that is indisputable. Yeah, any group who are potentially victims of a genocide will try and claim it as a genocide because with that carries an awful lot of legal power, legal weight, and of course publicity, etc., etc. So the point is right. But the way this has been framed in this report is he's implying that this professor is saying that the Sikh genocide was not a genocide, that the Sikhs are trying to claim it as a genocide for this reason. That is not the case. But again, this is, a classic case of taking something completely out of context and applying it in a completely different way to try and support your point. Again, this wasn't journalism. This was a complete hit job. It continues.
The first genocide happened on one of our guru's birthdays. And the second genocide was planned for November 8th, and the name was going to be Operation Shanti. Sikhs would have been entirely eliminated in Punjab. So they had to choose and decide to do something that ultimately saved the lives of thousands and thousands of people.
I could not locate any reliable evidence of Operation Shanti, but without dismissing the pain and suffering, I think that interview gives you an idea as to the Khalistani perspective on this matter, which is contested as an attempt to justify assassinations and terrorism.
So again, he's quite prepared to take evidence for anything anti-Khalistani or make statements without any evidence. And yet when a Khalistani makes a statement about Operation Shanti, well, we don't have any evidence to support that, so it can't be wrong. And then goes on to continue with his stated facts that Khalistanis are terrorists, etc. So again, this isn't reporting, this isn't journalism, this isn't even portraying different pieces of evidence and then coming to a conclusion. Here's my conclusion, and here's some concocted evidence to try and support the conclusions that I have already drawn and the message and the agenda I'm trying to put across. So again, it's a very, very amateurish attempt at basic propaganda. And then again, it continues.
Now let's talk about how Canada became a stronghold of Khalistani influence.
Canada is the stronghold and headquarters of Sikh extremist terrorism globally. Sikh organization propagate a false narrative, including making exaggerated claims that the Sikhs have had a genocide committed against them.
Over the last 2 years, we have brought you extensive and in-depth factual reporting on the influence the World Sikh Organization has over Canada.
So, and it goes on at great length about the World Sikh Organisation. And again, it's a huge propaganda hit job against the World Sikh Organisation. But it's interesting, he talks about factual reporting. There is absolutely no factual reporting here. He's just interviewed a load of Hindutva stooges, a load of people who support his own narrative. Again, it's just a blatant piece of propaganda, an not just anti-Khalistan, but anti-Sikh propaganda. Again, this Bob Wright character, is a regular appearer on this channel. So again, the whole thing is just a concocted piece of propaganda. Now, the final sign-off is very interesting. It's very ironic. There's a long section about Air India, and again, we don't need to go into that because we talk regularly about that. But I want you to listen to the irony of his sign-off about Air India.
And perhaps a third investigation into the Air India bombings, conducted by the United States instead of Canada, whose institutions like CSIS destroyed key evidence, could finally bring justice to the victims' families after 41 years, before the masterminds of these terrorist acts depart our world peacefully.
Oh, very good. Basically, what he's saying is he's blaming. He thinks that the Canadian government and the Canadian intelligence services have not investigated Air India properly, that they've buried evidence, etc. But if we got the FBI, we got the US agencies to investigate this properly, we'd come to a very different conclusion. Well, actually, ironically, he's right. And that is actually what we likewise campaign for, is that there should be an independent investigation, because it does appear that CSIS maybe have hidden some or buried some evidence that highlights who actually was behind this. And if the US investigated this as in independent investigators, it is likely they would uncover the truth of the Air India bombing. And I think media bazurgan might get a little bit of a shock if it was actually revealed who genuinely was behind the Air India bombing. It is, as is often reported, it is likely, and I refer to two actual proper journalists who wrote a very interesting book about the Air India bombing, who came to a very different conclusion, that it was more likely that the actual evidence that they uncovered and researched, that it was a false flag operation by Indian intelligence. That poor media bazurgan in his youthful exuberance clearly is more interested in putting across propaganda and feeding the Hindutva propaganda machine. I presume he's under the pay of India. If he actually got off his own backside and did some proper journalism, like he should be doing, then he'd actually might discover that two other proper journalists actually did some proper work on this and uncovered the uncomfortable truth that it wasn't the Khalistan organisation behind that bombing. It was probably somebody else, and that somebody else is probably India. So there you go, James. This whole piece was an absolutely outrageous, very amateurish piece of propaganda, and in itself, it's skirting, I would say, legality.
Absolutely. And I was just trying, while you were speaking there, I had to pull something up because I just remembered a case that involved both Bob Rye and Bezirgan, or however you pronounce his media company. But in any event, they were sued as of January 2025. There was a lawsuit pending against both of them, as well as a third party, for defamation and other claims by the mayor of Edmonton, whereas both of those individuals that we just saw in that story made claims that the mayor was involved in criminality and corruption, and he benefited from all types of different crimes and corruption when he was representative of the federal government. The case was suing both of those individuals for $750,000 in the King's Bench Court of Alberta. And again, I'll have to do some research to see if I can find out whatever happened to that case, because I couldn't, in that quick search there, I couldn't find the actual outcome of that case, or if it's still ongoing litigation. But we'll find out, and we'll let our viewers know. But it just shows the coercion, or the collusion, between these two individuals going back a fair ways. And of course, those are not the only two stories they've been involved with together. There's been many of them.
Yeah, again, I mean, sort of channels and hit pieces like this, you sort of, well, I think, are they even worth giving any airtime? But this one specifically, it was so deeply offensive and so particularly targeted. And again, it came up yesterday. It's already had a lot of views. So this is gaining traction. And this is, and of course, there'll be right-wing white people of Canada watching this thinking, oh, those Sikhs, they're all wanting to, it is this cult who are trying to murder everybody. And again, it's just feeding this really, really dangerous, divisive agenda that really needs to be stamped on. As I say, I do hope there's something here that the Sikh community in Canada can actually pick up legally against this, because again, it's skirting legality parts of this. Anyway, gents, we're rapidly running out of time, so we're going to have to really rush into our comment section and
I tried to keep my comments short.
Absolutely, yeah. Apologies to our audience, because we had a lot to cover through today, and I spent quite a long time on that video because there was an awful lot in that. But anyway, let's move on. And Gurpreet, thank you, Gurpreet, for this link. This link actually, just to quickly summarise what this link is about, it was an interview with an Indian professor who actually claims and done research, who stated that India's official GDP figures are 48% less than advertised. In other words, the Indian government has been basically lying about its GDP figures, and they are nearly half. The reality is nearly half of what they claim. This is actually, I have to say, pretty explosive, because that has massive impact on just about every financial institution, but particularly for India, who's trying to raise money on the international markets, for example, as every nation tends to do. If this is true, this will absolutely not just tank the Indian rupee, it will tank the Indian economy, because it will be unable to raise money on the international markets, etc., etc. It's absolutely massive, this, James.
Absolutely, and I've actually been following this, Angus, so it's very interesting and very important for people to look at, especially when you look at how India is basically creating their own formula in order to come to a number that is basically a falsified number. So
yeah, very concerning. Anyway, Minder Singh, how come people can agree to do a killing at $50,000? Crazy people out there. Now, this slightly ambiguous comment. Are you saying, is that not enough? Is that all, $50,000? I think the point being made there was actually, how can anybody actually be hired to hit somebody? Of course, this refers to the Indian consulate who tried to hire a killer on that one. So thank you, Minder, for that comment. This is a long comment. Sadly, again, we don't have time to go through this in detail, but basically, I just want to pick out one particular point from this comment. It's a shame we don't have time to go through, because lots of important. Thank you, Punjab, for this comment. But what you say is basically, to sum it up, is you reckon the Sikh community globally has basically lost its backbone because of this bullying from India. And what you say, the concept of nirbhau, excuse my pronunciation, to be without fear, the concept of nirvair, to be without hate or animosity, isn't there anymore. We've lost this. Basically, we've lost as a community. We've lost our backbone. We need to get it back. We need to stand up and be a little bit more robust in our fight back. Well, I think my comment on that is, well, there's only so much you can do when you remain peaceful and democratic, but I totally get the point. And again, I'm interested in the audience comment on that. And then can either one of you please explain to me, why do Sikhs think that America or Canada will make Khalistan for them? Well, I think to answer that, the only way that America, or the West basically, the only way that the West will agree to the establishment and support the whole concept of Khalistan is if we demonstrate to the West what's in it for the West. Now, we go into this in great detail regularly, James, about what the benefits of Khalistan geopolitically. In other words, having a beachhead in this very crucial region in Southeast Asia. It will be a democratic nation. It will be an ideal beachhead, militarily speaking, because it sits adjacent to the Chinese border, etc. But unfortunately, the only way that the West will get on side of the Khalistan argument is we've got to prove to the West what's in it for the West. What does the West benefit from that? And that is the strategy that the Khalistan movement is adopting and has to adopt to win over Western leaders, James.
Absolutely. And I think that there's also the fact that if the referendum that's going on shows that major support and starts to get a foothold and more support of other nations, including the United Nations as a whole, when you look at the right to people to decide the sovereignty and the direction of their nation, I think that will have a big play in it. Because I think that over the next several years, we're going to see a real push towards a lot of nations that are fighting for that sovereignty and that recognition, and trying to find a way to do that peacefully and to try to resolve some of the conflict that's happening in the world by allowing that sovereignty and that independence of nations. And I think that Khalistan will be a real model to show how it can be done properly.
Yeah, as we often say, India is not a reliable ally, so the breakup of India actually might serve the West otherwise. Killer 3, thank you, Killer 3, for your comments. This is a long thread, and again, I just picked a few comments out of this. But Killer talks about, and this is actually a really good point. Killer actually, I think, has appeared on Critics Corner before now, but this is a really sensible comment. Sikhs for Justice are actually, what he's saying is the Sikhs for Justice propaganda push on their side is actually is a little bit self-destructive. Because what you're saying is that, look, it's all very well highlighting and trying to get Donald Trump to ban Indians from the United States, and there was stop visas for Indians. Basically, Trump and his administration will just see this as a blanket ban. Let's just ban all Indians, including Sikhs. So what you're saying is it's actually an act of self-harm. And then you follow up by saying, and likewise with the trucking incident, the theatre about Sikhs for Justice offering rewards or financial help, etc., saying that's also backfired. Because again, the right wing is feeding the right wing narrative that who then in turn attacked all Sikhs in the trucking industry. So again, the whole point is Sikhs for Justice. Very robust rhetoric is actually backfiring. Gurpreet comes back. Thank you, Gurpreet, for your comments. And again, it was a long discussion. This. But one point that you made up, look, actually, Hindutva are involved in this. It's Hindutva that are inciting the problems here. It's Hindutva. It's not Sikhs for Justice the problem. Sikhs for Justice have actually tried to calm things down, which indeed they have been doing. But what Gurpreet highlights, saying, look, you're missing the point. It's actually, this has all been generated and whipped up by the Hindutva IT cells. And likewise, there was an incident where a Hindu trucker, I think, killed a newly married couple, but nobody's talking about that in the media. So it's double standards, James.
Absolutely. And let's not forget that the percentage of the incidents or accidents that we see, as tragic as they are, it is a low percentage overall, because 80% of the industry is not Sikh or, other minorities that are being targeted by this misinformation campaign. And therefore, all of those fatalities are not being reported. And therefore, it gives the wrong perception to the general public, that false narrative that it's all the Sikhs that are causing these deaths on the highways and carnage, and it's not the case at all. But as for it backfiring in terms of the immigration, I do see that as a concern because of the fact that there is still ongoing trade talks between Narendra Modi and Donald Trump, and what Narendra Modi is going to push as the narrative, stating that, see, they're trying to cause more problems for me, and that's what Modi's going to play that as. Yeah,
and I think Killer 3 point is very valid. Be careful with the rhetoric, because there is a fine line. If you cross that line, it can actually then prove to be self-destructive. Final set, Samsung kicks us off. The truth remains the truth, regardless of the BS. I think we totally endorse that one, James.
I think that we've said that many a times.
That's what we're here for. And Narinderjit Singh Saini says, very informative program. Thank you. Thanks a lot for both of you, please. But as we always say, thank you to our audience. It's you guys who keep us going. So thank you for all your comments. And Sam Singh, again, comes back with, freedom is beautiful. It absolutely is. That is what we fight for. We fight for democracy, the rule of law, and above all else, James, freedom.
And of course, we look at that final comment as always. Angus, go for it.
We do. Khalistan Zindabad. Thank you, Jessica Singh, I beg your pardon, who signs us off for today. Thanks so much for watching. I can't get my words out. I'm rushing so quickly now. The clock has counted down. Unfortunately, that is the end of Perspectives for another day. Thanks so much for all your comments. Do keep them coming in. We had some brilliant comments, some really interesting threads. Thank you for all of you who've been involved in those really interesting discussions on the threads. Thank you for all the points that you bring in and the facts and rumours that you might have heard. Again, it gives us a little bit of meat to get our teeth into, to have a look at as well. Do keep the comments coming. Don't forget, you can message us directly at message@satlogetv.com if there's any you'd like to bring to our attention, as many of you have done. Thank you for that. But that's it for another day. Thanks so much for watching. It's a goodbye from me, and it's a goodbye from James.
Stay safe, everyone.
You have, of course, been watching Perspectives. We will see you next time.